Welcome back to Finding Common Ground with Steve and Heather. Today we will be talking to Regina Conti. And Steve, why don't you introduce our audience to her? She's out your way in Utica.
Hi, Regina. It's nice to see you again. And I look forward to having this conversation with you, with Heather. I would like to get a little bit of background with you on what started you with your experience with IDD.
Okay. So I grew up on Long Island in New Hyde Park. My dad was a rehabilitation counselor. So I worked with developmentally disabled folks and eventually moved into administration and became the regional commissioner for developmental disability. And so this was during the 1970s. And so he did a lot of traveling. He funding and defunding programs. It was during the deinstitutionalization, the start of the deinstitutionalization. So I had a lot of exposure to people with disabilities and programs for people with disabilities, and was really excited about the potential for having more people with disabilities living in our community. We had lots of friends who had developmental disabilities or had family members who had developmental disabilities, neighbors who stopped in and so forth. And so that started me with an interest in special education as an undergraduate at Boston College. And unfortunately, while I was there, I had kind of a demoralizing experience working in a school that I'm sure does lots of great things. But at my age, I found it kind of an overly stressful, kind of depressing environment where there were young people who were what was termed at the time severely and profoundly disabled. And even though we were right in the middle of a college campus, we couldn't do anything on the college campus with them. It was a self-contained facility. And from my mind, there was sort of scary things going on, like people that were injuring themselves or aggressive toward others, or, so that this all wasn't what I had in mind when I was thinking about trying to be out there in the world helping people. And so I started to take some classes in the psychology department to see what else was out there. And through those experiences, I became familiar with Sudbury Valley School that, Heather, you mentioned that you had read a little bit about. And I was really inspired by that environment. So this is an environment not specifically for people with disabilities in the least. I mean, it was one of the educational projects from the 60s that worked on the principle that children learn by playing and children learn by being with adults that are doing things that they're interested in. So there were no requirements at this school, no grades. And this was one of my first research experiences in psychology, was to interview the people who had done all of their schooling at the Sudbury Valley School, from kindergarten through 12th grade.
It sounds like you were a little bit skeptical when you started. So I'm interested to hear your perspective after you interviewed them, because it's hard to understand a school with no grades, right? And no homework assignments and just not the typical structure. So what did you find?
Right. Yeah. Yes. So I had, spent so much of my life jumping through these hoops and trying to meet these expectations that adults set out for me, that I was really curious to see what happened to these people who spent their childhood playing. And by the way, some people also have the idea that you'll go to the school and kids will just magically sort of sit in desks and work out math problems and stuff like that. But that's not what you see if you go to the Sudbury Valley School. You see a kickball game on the front lawn, and you see kids kicking back and playing Monopoly or baking cookies in the kitchen. And those are the kinds of things that they choose to do given the choice. So these kids were basically just hanging out and playing their whole childhood. I interviewed them as adults, and there weren't really any differences between these folks who had done all their schooling at Sudbury Valley School and other adults in their communities. They had similar incomes, they had similar life satisfaction, they had similar educational attainment. The only difference that we could really find was that they were more likely to go into creative pursuits, right? So that kind of got me interested in creativity. That was something that I studied in graduate school, the link between motivation and creativity. But the whole experience at Sudbury Valley School got me really interested in motivation, in this idea that being motivated by extrinsic rewards like money, like grades, like awards and so forth, actually undermines learning, undermines creativity, and emotionally is pressuring and makes people feel tense, and creates kind of motivational experiences like procrastination. While intrinsic motivation, like the motivation to do something because you're excited about it, because it's personally fulfilling, that those kinds of motives actually are what make people approach, challenge, engage, learn in a deep way. So that's what I pursued my graduates. That's what I was interested in pursuing in graduate school. In relation to the topic of disability, one kind of interesting side note about Sudbury Valley School is lots of kids with disabilities ended up at Sudbury Valley School because they were failing in the traditional educational system. And it did a lot better with this freedom.
Does the school still exist? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It still exists, that model?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. Because sometimes you hear about a program or an approach and you're like, that's so neat. And then they say, but it's not, it's not around anymore, or it's not available, or they lost their funding. So I was just wondering if that was still an option for people.
Yeah, it's still alive and well. It's in Massachusetts, in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And it's a place that's very inclusive. And you know that inclusion has become something that I'm really passionate about and really engaged with. I mean, as you can imagine, with the sorts of things, or the sorts of activities that I was describing earlier, the students learn and engage in mixed age groups. And so there's not this kind of assumption that everyone has to be the same, of the same ability and the same age and the same level, like you might see in a traditional school that is trying to teach kids basic skills. So kids learn by doing, and they learn from one another. And many kids with disabilities do really well there. There is a group that doesn't probably do as well, a group that I'm really concerned with now, and that's the group that has higher support needs. So a private, just like all private schools, they don't have the same federal funding for providing support to students with disabilities. So like they wouldn't have funding for one-to-one aid and things like that. So you wouldn't see students that have really significant needs at the Sudbury Valley School. But that didn't occur to me as a problem at the time. But fast forward to the present day, I have two children. Both of my children have disabilities. My son has the more, what's now termed profound autism. And so I've learned just an enormous amount about the disability world through my experiences with him.
Right, because you kind of, as a professional, I'm sure had some experiences. I mean, that sounds like what I went through. I'm a psychologist too. And then you have your own kids. And when you're sitting in the parent chair, everything shifts. It just feels different. And you learn it in a much different way, a much more personal way. And for me, it changed how I looked at numbers. If I was doing IQ tests, hundreds of IQ tests a year. And then after a while, I started thinking, who cares what the number is? Let's look at the kid. What do they need? What does the family need? What can we wrap around them to put them in a better place so they're feeling better too? Because as you said, at that school, it wasn't about grades or if they could pass a Regents exam or a standardized test. It was really, how can they network with the people around them and have a sense of community and helping people of all different abilities achieve the same goal and not expecting everyone to do it the same way. Because when you hand somebody a piece of paper and a pencil and it's a multiple choice, there's only one right answer. But if you're sitting at a table and doing something creatively, there's a million answers. And it's a beautiful concept. It sounds a lot like Montessori. Is that a reach or is that accurate?
It's even more open and free than Montessori. So Montessori has there's a structure there. The students choose works, and they have a lot of freedom in terms of choosing what they want to work on, but there are some limits as well. So Sudbury Valley School really didn't have limits. In fact, through the years, they voted on, they have a TV room. The kids can go and watch TV if they want. There was a point in the 1970s where they voted on whether the students should be allowed to smoke marijuana on campus, So at all decisions at the school, all hiring and firing of staff, all budget decisions are made by a vote of the whole school population, and every student gets one vote, including kindergartners. So
I love that.
So it's a really, I love it too. It's a really interesting model. that's really useful to think about. Like I said, I think the one real shortcoming is that it doesn't include students that have disabilities with support needs, with real high support needs, right? So that's the population that I've become particularly interested in, because that's the population that my son is in. And he is somebody that's very social, very warm, happy. Do you remember the days when they used to call kids like this low functioning? It always kind of really bothered me, because given his challenges, I think he functions extremely well, right? And he loves to be out in the community.
He does well with what he's got going on, right? I mean, I feel the same way whenever I hear that, or I hear somebody described as high functioning, but they're struggling, and they're like, well, you're high functioning, and it gives you a feeling both ways, and it's not fair, because if you have a disabling condition, you do. And I love the idea of talking about it as profound autism, or saying that they have high support needs, rather than insinuating that cognitively they're radically different than us, or that they don't think about things in the same way. I just think their body doesn't cooperate in the same way as ours. All the stars have to align for Devin to communicate something to us effectively. She has to put forth so much effort to say a sentence, and she can't do it vocally. She's spelling it out using a device or gesturing. And I can't imagine if every time we had an idea in our mind, we had to do the motor planning and make sure people were listening to us, and feel like maybe they aren't respecting us because maybe our voice sounds different, or our voice is robotic because we're using a device. And that's so many things for people to manage and keep going. The resilience is huge. You do lots of different research on different topics. And now that you have a son, you said he's 19, I think, right? So he's nearing the end of the school journey. Like, research-wise, has that changed what you're focusing on?
Right. So my first area of research within the area of disability was looking at parenting and what having a child with autism does to parents motivationally. And so that, in that work, what I found for my own self was that I felt like it made me a better parent, not only to my son that has the higher support needs, but also to my daughter, who has very limited support needs and is very independent. And so I designed some studies to see, so there's different theories of parenting goals. And one sort of type of goal that a lot of parents are focused on are what I call self-image goals. So these are goals that have to do with having the child reflect positively on the parent, make the parent proud, perform well in comparison to their peers, be successful competitively, and things like this. And I found that those sorts of motives just were out the window for me, that I didn't care about any of that. I just cared about my kids being able to get engaged in things that excited them, where they were learning and having positive experiences. And I was really concerned with their unique needs being met. So those sorts of goals are more in the category of compassionate goals in the parenting literature. And so what I found was that, indeed, having a child with autism makes parents more compassionate and have more of an emphasis on compassionate goals. Interestingly, I didn't find in the research, you talk about numbers, so maybe we don't, I'll talk a little bit about how I've moved a little bit away from numbers in my research. I am trained as a quantitative social psychologist. So what most of my research does is tries to identify variables and think about how they might be related to one another, and then measure them and look at whether whether the numbers support the idea that I started out with. But sometimes the numbers don't. Sometimes there's more to the story than what the numbers can tell you. So what the numbers did tell me in that study, though, was that people who had a child with autism did more strongly endorse compassionate goals in their parenting, but they didn't express less of an interest or less support for self-image goals. But the other thing that I saw was that I looked at all different measures of family functioning, like parents' life satisfaction, their satisfaction in themselves as parents, their sense of self-efficacy as parents. And all of those things were predicted by compassionate goals. So whether they had children who had a disability or not. So I think it kind of supported my idea that that it makes people a better parent to parent a child with autism. Well, in that particular study, we looked at autism, but I think it probably is true of other disabilities as well. And then in my more recent work, okay, so go ahead. Did you have?
I was just going to say, I agree with all of that. And I'm thinking of, Steve, you met Regina by bringing some of the foster care children, or was it your son? I'm not sure, to see her, to collect data. So both? Okay. So that was how the connection was made.
Yes. Regina met my son, Dustin, and he's much older. So he's 34, so we had no idea what autism was way back then. They didn't diagnose it back then. But it's interesting what you talk about with the fun things, because I remember them shoving him from a regular class because of his lots of behaviors and things that they didn't know what was going on, into certain classes, and they just kept lower functioning. They said he couldn't read. They said he couldn't do math, any of that. And way back then, he really liked sports at a really young age. And we got him like baseball cards and things like that, and he was reading off the back of that. So I literally brought the baseball cards into class, and they started using the back of these baseball cards for him to do math. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's followed him through life. Like when they have the draft right now, I don't know how he does it. There's like 400 or 500 players in the draft. He knows the back of these cards, their batting averages. He knows how to do it. I don't know how to do it half the time, and he does. And it's because, you want to know why? It's just like you said, we found a thing that made sense to him, and it's something that was fun and something that he wanted to do.
Right. And you built a relationship around it. Do you know, like, it wasn't that you were drilling him on facts and figures and formulas. It was learning about what's on the back of the baseball card, something that he adored. And because people were showing interest in what he loved, and that's DIR, right? That's floor time. Right. That's my area. And I love that you didn't know what DIR was or what Montessori was or research that like Regina was doing, but you knew that those baseball cards were the ticket. And I think a lot of parents that are listening, look at what your kid is drawn to, what they light up with, and leverage it. That's what matters to them. And you can learn a lot of things through something as simple as a baseball card. That's a great story.
Yeah, Regina.
Does your son have any special interests, Regina? Like, is there anything he's really drawn to?
My son loves animals. So he's obsessed with animals. And he has his favorites depending on the week, and he likes the animal sounds. I mean, that's pretty much like all of his speech is just about asking about the different animals and the animal sounds. So, do
you have an idea of what he'll do after school? I mean, if he's 19, he gets to go to school until 22, right? That's the new rule, I think, to your 22nd birthday. So it's the cliff, right? You know, I'm almost at the edge of the cliff too, so I can't help but ask.
We don't really know. There's actually not a lot out there for people with high support needs and it's one thing that I'm really concerned with in my work as well, creating community opportunities that are really inclusive. It's kind of interesting that, a big part of the disability rights movement over the last 30 or, 40, even 50 years is about the institutionalization, integrating people into the community, including people into the community. But the agencies that serve people with disabilities themselves segregate and themselves exclude. The people that need the services
it's more
the
than
most,
just a ramp, right? Like people think, I have a ramp to the front door and I have the button that you can push to get in, but it's more than physical accessibility. Steve and I were just on a phone call with a mom, and she told us that her child, she helped fundraise and support the building of this community center that was going to have all these programs for local children in her neighborhood. And she was very excited that her child, who's in a wheelchair, would have somewhere to go that was really close to home, because they don't have a lot of social opportunities. And then she found out the building wasn't even physically accessible, but because their child is incontinent and needs help with toileting and would need to bring a staff member to support their medical needs, they couldn't go. They were actually denied entry. And when you think about that, this is happening in 2024. Even when we can provide the staff member to a company, they're not letting children into programs. That's upsetting.
This is true of agencies that serve exclusively people with disabilities. So try to get your adult child into a community rehabilitation program. They'll tell you they can't accept participants that need one-to-one support, even if the one-to-one support will be provided by their self-direction plan. So it's not even, it's OPWDD's rules that prevent that. So it's really interesting that agencies really don't have much for, to answer your question about my son.
Regina, when we went out there I think we've been out there a couple of times now to Colgate, right? For some of your surveys and stuff like that. You'd be in a better position to explain a little bit what you were looking for with those surveys. And
so my more recent work is on social inclusion. So as you probably got kind of caught on from what I've been saying so far, there's been a lot of progress in terms of adults with disabilities living in mainstream communities. So many big institutions have closed and so forth. But there has been less progress on people with disabilities actually feeling part of the community, actually being fully engaged and being able to take advantage of opportunities in the community. So I've shifted some of my teaching in that direction to provide service learning opportunities to students. And so I've been partnering with 7 different local organizations. And those local organizations host project teams that are neurodivergent. So they include both Colgate students and they include community members who have developmental disabilities. And the groups work together on a creative project that fits with the mission of that organization. And kind of like the sub goal there is to try to support the organization to welcome a wider range of community members, to welcome people who have neurodevelopmental disabilities. So I would love to talk to Heather's at that community center that Heather was talking about, and have some of my students go in and work with them to build their confidence that they can include that young man who uses a wheelchair, who has medical needs. And I'm really committed to accommodating the full range of participants. So as I've done this work in the community, I've been wanting to do some research to actually document the social inclusion experiences that community members are having, both in my programs and in their lives in general, right? And so I've been trying to develop a methodology for that allows participants to share their community inclusion experiences, right? So I started out with questionnaires, these standard questionnaires that ask about things related to social inclusion. So social inclusion has to do with relationships, about being out there in the community and actually making friends and connecting with people, feeling part of a group. And it also has to do with meaningful participation. So it has to do with being able to use whatever organization it is in the way that you'd like to use it, to be able to go to the gym and be able to use the equipment, or to be able to take an art class at the local art center and be able to have everything that you need to be able to make that art express whatever it is that you're, that you'd like to express with it. So, so I started out with these basic questionnaires, but what I found was that a lot of my participants both weren't engaged by them, and in some cases couldn't respond to them. They didn't have the literacy skills, or even if the questionnaire items were read aloud, it didn't make sense to them to respond to according to how strongly they agree with statements, right? So we had to do a lot of work in terms of simplifying the questionnaire items. We did some work illustrating the questionnaire items. You probably remember that from when your kids came, Steve, right? They helped us to think about what kinds of visuals would help people to understand what was going on, to understand what the scale responses meant by giving visual cues. And So that was one step, just making the questionnaire itself more accessible. But we've had to go further than that, right? So what we found is that we get feedback. Like each group of participants tells us, like, so did you feel as though you were able to share what's important about your experiences in the community through this research session? And through the first couple of studies, a lot of participants weren't engaged and didn't really feel like it was a good way of sharing. Some participants wanted to tell their stories. They wanted to tell us what they'd done in the communities and what it meant to them. So we incorporated some open-ended items and started out with that to kind of like put the participant more in charge of the research session, to give them the sense that we wanted to hear their ideas. We wanted to hear their experiences. And then we had to go even a little bit further than that. So we had some participants, like my son is actually one of them, who really don't have fluent language, right? So they weren't able to tell their stories. Maybe like Heather was saying, either they could give us a little bit of verbal responses with a whole lot of effort, or they weren't even able to do that. But we could see during the community programs that they were really engaged and they were getting a lot out of the experiences. So we've adapted this method called photo voice, where participants use cell phones or iPads to take pictures of what they're excited about while they're out in the community. And then those pictures tell us something about their perspective and their experiences. And then we use those pictures to give some kind of background and to give a context when they answer the open-ended questions, and also when they respond to the scaled questions. So it's like kind of a 3-step process now to getting the picture of their community inclusion experiences. So, but like Heather was talking about earlier, we've kind of gone a little bit beyond. We've built the methodology beyond the numbers. So now it's a mixed method rather than just being quantitative, just trying to get questionnaire measures that tell us like the degree to which they feel they're making connections with people, the degree to which they feel they're participating in meaningful ways in the community. We're also getting a more nuanced picture of what they're actually doing at the community organizations, in the programs, what they're proud of, what's engaging them, what's exciting to them about those experiences.
Yeah, Regina, I think you were on point. I remember my kids, they coming back on the road trips back, because I'm in New Hartford area, and you're in Hamilton, and I remember them telling me that they had the best. I asked them what's the best thing that happened, and in your thing, it was all the times that you guys engaged with them, and they felt like they were part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wish your kids could participate in the actual programs that we do. So your kids came down and helped us to develop the research materials because we needed, for every stage of this process, we want people with developmental disabilities telling us what's working and what's not working about the research process, right? So I wish your kids could actually participate in the program. So when we do the programs, they meet at local organizations together with the students for 6 weeks, and they collaboratively do a project. So that's really fun and really cool. I wish like I said, it would be nice if your kids could participate. I realize the logistics might be complicated.
If you had a goal, that something positive that you would like to see come out of the IDD system, what would it be? Maybe is it something you would change, or is there something that you would do to help us as we go down this path looking for solutions?
Well, there's lots of things, I think, that I would like to see changed and improved. But okay, so the big ones, one thing is I would like to see the disability support systems like OPWDD stop discriminating against people with high support needs.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think every program and every opportunity should be open to the full range of potential participants, everyone who has an interest. That is really big. I think one thing that would help to balance things as well, another thing that I think is really important to help balance is there's a lot of talk about rights, about people's rights, and they talk about self-determination, and but they don't talk very much about care. And I think that people with disabilities with developmental disabilities in particular, often need care. I mean, there are some that can be fully independent, and I don't, more power to them. But I think there are a lot of people who need care and deserve good quality care. And I think that the way the system is set up now, there's a lot of attention to those few people who are independent and a lot of push toward independence and not a lot of focus on providing good quality support, good quality care.
And I actually do hear that. And in my conversations with the state, they try to push some of the higher individuals into work programs and all that kind of stuff. Look, my son's come a long ways, Regina, a really long ways, but he's not going to be able to live on his own. It's just there's too many other things that he needs. And like you said, the care is what he needs. So he's going to need services surrounding him for, from the foreseeable future. And I don't see it changing. And I think you're 100% right. I think too much focus is going on. Trying to get, and I've heard it straight out of deputy commissioners' mouths that they want to try and get everybody on disability into jobs. And I don't know if that's realistic. And I don't know. I go back to what my son likes to. My son's in a dayhab right now. Fortunately, one of the few that are left in this area. He loves it. I don't even want to take that away from him because he will run to the bus to get on it because he loves going there. And I hate to take that away from him and force him into a situation where his quality of life isn't. I'd like to have his quality of life.
Right. That's a sad thing. Yeah. So are they planning on closing that dayhab or no?
I don't know, but look, I see the handwriting on the wall with a lot of other stuff. He's with ARC, so I don't know. Maybe I'm hoping they can hang on, but you know how it is. I think they started at the state level with closing these IRAs and dayhabs and everything else. And with funding, I worry about it hitting to nonprofits next.
Right. Yeah. So I've heard about, but I don't know very much about this new program called Dayhab Without Walls. Like it seems like a nice idea. I mean, what I see is like rather than just close programs that are problematic, what about trying to improve them? Right. Trying to add supports, try to increase the community exposure.
Yeah, you're talking exactly how I feel. It's interesting what you're saying that because one of our kids that was in between, he was going to Tradewinds at UCP here, in between the regular year and the summer school program, and they took a week between that and did one of those, school without walls, and they had it at the Root Farm for a week. He was so excited to go. He's 20 years old. He was so excited to go. He has a lot of complex needs, and he went. And he didn't like the first job they gave him to work with and stuff like that. But he certainly liked the second job, and he did it the rest of the week. And he had a blast. He wanted to know if he could go back the following Monday, but it was only a 1 week camp type situation. Mm-hmm. But I would love to see them do more of that and make it around the the school part of it, because I think they're going to get way more out of that in a quality of life anytime than trying to, push some of this regular curriculum down them.
When I'm thinking of the phrase inclusion delusion, it might be different than what you're thinking. But when I hear people talk about inclusion, sometimes it's forced. Like I'm thinking more of people who maybe enjoy drinking coffee quietly at their kitchen table, but because they are in a program that's supposed to be community-based, we're telling them you have to go into the community and go into a coffee shop and sit at this bustling, store where people are walking by and it's loud and it's not actually what I want, but that's inclusive and that's the setting that is in your life plan. And I found that some individuals with disabilities just don't have a choice. So they want to be included, for sure. Everybody needs to feel like there's that sense of community and like they belong somewhere. And the environment needs to be accessible to them physically and emotionally and sensory-wise. But they don't have the autonomy sometimes, whether it's their condition or our perception of them, to tell us what they want that inclusion to look like. And I just find it odd that in our particular state, the podcast comes out of New York State, that if you're in certified, which means, it's not controlled by the consumer, it's controlled by the agency or the state, or you're in self-direction, we could all be the same people, but those two systems can't work together. So like if I have a friend that's in a certified setting, I can't go visit them with my self-directed staff. It's not allowed. And if I'm at a community center and we're doing self-direction, a certified class can't come in and do it with us. And it doesn't make sense to me because we all want to choose how much we want to be included, right? And what kind of scene we need to be in and who we want to surround ourselves with. So it just strikes me as odd that sometimes it's forced and it doesn't feel right. And other times it's blocked, even with people who are like us. So I would love to hear more about your research and what you're finding in this area, because it's just, as a parent and a professional, we want to feel like our kids are included, but it's a big undertaking sometimes, right?
Okay. So as I was saying earlier, so inclusion, I'm focusing on social inclusion. So it's beyond like mere physical inclusion. So like, I agree with you that it's just having your cup of coffee in a coffee shop by yourself is not going to make the person feel any more welcomed in the community than having it in their kitchen, right? We want to go beyond this idea that we just need to have people out with other non-disabled community members to thinking about social inclusion. And there's two parts to social inclusion. One is forming meaningful relationships. So a person should have opportunities to connect with other people in the community around things that are of interest to them, like Steve's son. I hope he knows some other people that collect baseball cards. And, I don't know what's your daughter into, or you have 4 kids, but you were talking about your daughter earlier.
Yeah. So, I mean, for my daughter, Devin, who's more of my high needs child, we're just discovering what she actually likes. And I know that sounds so strange. We kind of assumed a few things for years. So we're just like realizing she's really into math and she wants to talk about the royal family. Now, isn't that so funny? I don't know where she got that passion from, but as she's spelling now and she's telling us the things that she's interested in, the royal family and political fiascos are 2 things that she likes to learn about and talk about. So we're all different, right?
Yeah. So I don't know, like a book and movie club, or I don't know where, So like even some of these,
Regina, I have an example of I think of where you're heading with the social inclusion. I had a call from a parent 2 or 3 weeks ago who told me that they weren't going to send their I think he was 19 or 20, something like that, into an art situation for one of the art classes at one of the art studios. And I actually happened to be meeting with that art studio and another art studio the following week. And they were I asked about how they did their program, and they would have all these kids they were working with one of the agencies here that had kids with disabilities and teens with disabilities, but they were making them all draw the same thing. And what happened was her son didn't want to draw the same thing. So, and I told them that at the art studio, and they're looking into doing something that just along the lines you're talking about with the social inclusion, so they can go down there and draw what they want.
Right. And then they're still doing the same thing as everyone else. They're just drawing what matters to them. That's what's motivating them. That's their motivation. You don't want to take that part away at the cost of inclusion, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's on the kind of participation side of social inclusion. So they should be able to engage in ways that are exciting and interesting to them and community activities. And then they should also be hopefully making friends and making, feeling a bond with the groups that they're doing things with. So I was telling Steve earlier that what I've been striving for in my research is developing a methodology so that we can capture the perspective of the full range of people with developmental disabilities when they're at community activities. And we started out with traditional questionnaires, and now the methodology has evolved to really be focused on having them take photos of what's engaging them, because it's something that's very accessible, and it's something that allows even people who don't have fluent language to be able to share what's exciting to them about whatever it is they're doing.
That's so cool. With the research that you have done with motivation, and I'm thinking of the inclusion now, I'm thinking of, and this is a really change of topic, so I apologize, but I know that Steve and I run into this question, and a lot of families are facing it, and I will be too soon, and your son's 19. But when school's ending, and then you have to enter that adult world, and things are radically different, how would you suggest for parents, with the research and the knowledge that you have in this area, how can we tap into things that are going to motivate them? And I'm not wording it well, but I just feel like we know our kids are capable of so many things, and we know they have these high areas of interest, and we want to like throw them into that area, but sometimes we don't know how to engage them. Like, my son loves music. He is so into music, and he can listen to any song and play it, but it took like intense, direct, like a punishment was going to occur if he did not start taking lessons, because he didn't know how to read music. And if he didn't know how to read music, he couldn't play with a band. And if he could, so we had to I felt like strong arm him into do something that he now loves. But we had to push him, and it feels hard as a parent sometimes, because they're telling you, I don't want to do that, or I'm not interested in that, when really it's just unfamiliar. It's unknown. They don't have motivation for it yet, because they can't guess what it will give them. We have that perspective.
I've had that struggle with my son as well. So like the beginning stages of things that are different from what his routine is. Like, he just has a very short attention span and can also be very resistant. So like learning to ride a bike, like I knew this was something he could do because he has great balance and he's very coordinated, and he loves to be active. But, just having to, I remember teaching him to pedal, and like literally like the goal for the day was to have him do one sidewalk square.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like you. I felt like, that's like, I felt like I was really, it was like pulling teeth. It was, I felt like I was forcing him to do something that was like painful or whatever. But now he rides his two-wheeler. He rides all over the place. He rides in Special Olympics, and he loves it, So sometimes I do think a push in the beginning can help someone. I think it can help someone get engaged in something that will eventually become highly intrinsically motivating to them. So something is intrinsically motivating when it meets your psychological needs. So your psychological needs are to feel autonomous, to feel competent, and to feel connected. So they may not feel autonomous when you're pushing them in the beginning, but sometimes you have to do that just to get enough confidence so that they can engage in a way that feels more autonomous to them.
You don't know if you're going to like it till you try it, right? And you can't just try it once. You're like you're saying, you got to have some competency with it. You have to start to feel a little more comfortable before you realize. And I'll tell my kids, it's not even maybe that you're going to love this class that you're going to take, or maybe you'll never do pottery again, but maybe you'll meet somebody at that class that's going to be your best friend the rest of your life. You just don't know unless you don't put yourself out there. And so for some families I've worked with, we do experiments. We do experiments. We collect data, because especially with kids with autism and individuals with autism, their mind is built that way. So we collect data. How did that make you feel? Is that something you would try again? What parts were good? What parts would you change? And then it makes it we're using the part of their brain that works really well. But it's also, once you write it down and you're talking about it, it changes it. It solidifies it in a different way. And I've seen people feel really proud of their data, their experiments. Even if they never do that thing again, they did it. And so that's something I'm trying to stay true to with my kids, that we have a new experience. We set a time frame. Every 14 days, we're going to have a new experience. And I know it sounds crazy, but we got a lot going on at our house. So we almost have to schedule it, and it has to be the expectation. But I wasn't sure if you had other ideas for families that have that rigid mindset or hesitation.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think people should push colleges and universities where they live to include people with developmental disabilities, to offer inclusion programs, to have activities that are open to people with developmental disabilities in the different departments that on campus. I think some of those can be really nice opportunities for adults with developmental disabilities. And other organizations as well, like we were talking about art centers and pottery studios. And I work with a community wellness center that does an inclusion program. I mean, that's been really great for them. Like, one of the things I really love is when these organizations, even after my programs are over, start to recruit members with developmental disabilities. And they, from having the program, they realize, wow, this isn't so hard. We can do this. Like I was saying earlier, for some participants, like, they would need the support of, staff people, additional staff people there, but some really don't, that they just need a little bit of understanding, a little bit of patience, some accommodation in some cases. So so I would encourage families to see what's available in their community, try to explore their children's needs, their children's interests, like you are, by exposing them to lots of different types of experiences, and trying to push the organizations that host those types of experiences to widen what they do and to be more inclusive.
I love the idea of college campuses. When I was working for BOCES, we were at a local college, and they could stay in the dorms when there were breaks and the RAs were still there. They had rooms that they could try spending the night at college. They could buddy up with one of the college students and go to classes with them. They didn't have to do the assignments necessarily unless they wanted to. I mean, some of them are capable of it. Others just wanted the experience of sitting through a college class and then going to lunch with their buddy and all of their friends and having that social experience and feeling like they're part of the campus, not just a classroom located on the campus. And I think that's what we're all hoping, that we can develop those new opportunities. And what's better for our psych majors and our special ed majors and nursing students to spend time with our loved ones? Because what do we say, Steve? If the dentist would just meet our loved ones, they would fall in love with them and they'd want to help us. But there's not enough dentists that are embracing our population. And maybe it starts there. Maybe it starts in high schools and in colleges. And it's more than exposure. It has to be strategic. It has to be planned to really build that connection and those relationships. But I love that idea, Regina. Thank you.
Yeah. As we were talking about, like, in our conversation over the past hour, what I really would love to see is an opening up of support for people with developmental disabilities to include the full range of people with developmental disabilities. I'd love everyone, every agency, every program that serves people with disabilities to think about their admissions criteria or whatever, and think about whether they can widen what they do. Because right now, I think there's extreme discrimination within the disability services community, such that there's really nothing for people who have high support needs. So I guess that would be my big push.
Thank you.
Regina, thank you so much. I really respect the research that you're doing for the IDD community. My kids have had a chance to experience some of that. We'd love to do it again. My kids would love to do it again. And like I said, the whole purpose of this is finding common ground and solutions to some of these things. So we really, really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been really fun and interesting. I'd love to hear more about the work that both of you are doing as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. And tune in again, and we will have some more exciting topics. I can't wait to share with our audience everything we have in store. Have a nice day.